And one of the things I hear from skeptics sometimes is they'll say, well, Jesus never claimed to be God. And in a sense, he didn't get up in English on a mountain and say, I am God. But he did claim to be God at least 3 times that I've found in Scripture.
All right, let's see it.
When he claimed, for example, to be the Son of God, the Pharisees tore their clothes, because to claim that God is your Father was to claim to be equal with God, which was to be claiming to be the same essence and nature. And the Pharisees understood what he was doing, and that's why they wanted to stone him for blasphemy.
So this is a reference to John 10, verses 30 through 33, but I think we need to include through verse 38 in order to get the full story here. And there are 2 claims being made in this video. The first is that in claiming to be the Son of God, Jesus is claiming to be equal with God, therefore to share the same essence or nature. Now, one could understand this to mean Jesus is sharing in the divine nature, meaning Jesus is divine, but very clearly this is a claim to a Nicene concept of homoousios, of consubstantiality. Jesus is not just claiming to be divine, Jesus is claiming to be a part of God, capital G, God themselves, the very God of Israel. The other claim is that in picking up stones to stone Jesus for blasphemy, his accusers are recognizing his claim of unity with God to be a claim to being, capital G, God themselves, the very God of Israel. Neither of these claims holds any water whatsoever and requires importing outside later developed philosophical frameworks in order to make this reading work. The text itself argues against this reading. To begin, Jesus is claiming 3 things about his identity with God. Jesus says, I and the Father are one, I am the Son of God, and I am in the Father, and the Father is in me. Now, none of these 3 things actually demands or even suggests we understand Jesus to be claiming to be, capital G, God themselves, the very God of Israel. The first and the last claim about unity with God are just that, are about unity with God, unity in purpose, in will, even in some manner of divinity. And we can go to the intercessory prayer in John 17 for Jesus praying 3 times that his followers become one with him, just like he is one with the Father, in the exact same way. So whatever we understand Jesus to be claiming about unity with God, in John 10, Jesus wants his own followers to attain that same nature with him. So if you understand Jesus to be claiming to be consubstantial with capital G, God themselves, the very God of Israel, then in John 17, Jesus is praying that his followers become consubstantial with him as well, which means his followers become part of the Trinity. Now, there are all kinds of arguments for why, no, we have to understand Jesus' reference to unity with God to mean something different in John 17, and there's no reason to think that. It's the same unity. The only reason to think that is if you cannot accept that is what Jesus means. And then Jesus' claim to be the Son of God very clearly is not a claim to consubstantiality with God. There's nothing in any text from John or any time before that indicates claiming to be the Son of God is claiming to be capital G, God themselves, the very God of Israel. The other claim about blasphemy also has no support. Blasphemy was reviling God, and almost always it had to do with the inappropriate use or invocation of God's name. Now, there is no text anywhere from this time period or any time before that indicates that they drew a line between claiming to be divine or God's Son and claiming to be God. And one side of that line was blasphemous and the other side was not. That is the claim that one is making when they say they must have understood him to be claiming to be God. It's saying that they would not have done that if he was only claiming to be divine or the Son of God rather than capital G, God themselves. And there are absolutely no data that support the notion that there was a threshold there. And therefore, Jesus had to be on the other side of that threshold. That doesn't make any sense. The text of John 10 makes clear what Jesus is claiming. To begin, when they pick up rocks to stone him and he asks why, they say, "You being human, make yourself theon." Now that is an anarthrous use of that noun, theos. Anarthrous means it does not have the definite article. And that overwhelmingly means that it is some kind of qualitative predication. And we see that qualitative predication in the reference to Jesus being human, Jesus being a man, a human. That is also anarthrous. And so if there's any kind of symmetry here, if this is any kind of parallelism, then we have to understand theon to be qualitative. Just as the academic consensus agrees, theos is qualitative in John 1:1. It is not the logos is, capital G, God themselves, the very God of Israel. It is the logos is divine. The logos is deity. The logos is a God. So what's going on in Genesis 10 is parallel to that. They're saying, you being a human, make yourself a God, or make yourself divine. It is qualitative, just like the reference to being a human or being human is qualitative. And Jesus' response confirms that reading. Because if they are saying, you make yourself capital G, God themselves, the very God of Israel, Jesus' response doesn't even acknowledge, much less resolve that concern, because Jesus goes on to say, by quoting Psalm 82, if those people, those humans, were called gods, not capital G, God themselves, but small g, qualitative gods, deities, then why are you getting upset with me for saying I'm the Son of God? If they understood Jesus to be saying, you make yourself capital G, God themselves, the very God of Israel, Jesus' response doesn't cut it. It is a straw man. It does not even respond to their claim. And so if there is anything consistent, and if there is anything logically coherent about John 10, Jesus is claiming to be deity, divine, a God, sharing a unique relationship with the God of Israel. For that, his accusers get upset with him, and he defends himself on the grounds that other humans were called deity, divine, gods. Why are you getting upset with me for claiming to be the same?